Thanks for joining us today. Today we're going to run through our P6-Calculator tool, and I'm going to focus on the costing aspects of some of the things that we've done with different clients. So the key thing here is our calculator tool is infrastructure technology that we've been using for many years. I'd say well over 10 years with a variety of clients. So it is an add-on tool that you plug into your P6. So think of it that way, and it is going to be food for thought. So I'm going to run through different ideas that we've done with different clients. Now, I'm Nicole Jardin. I'm joining you today from Calgary. I'm the founder and CEO of Emerald. And I do need to definitely apologize to all of you. I bumped this webinar so many times. I'm sure you didn't think I was ever going to do it. Now, let's touch on why we built this tool. Well, what we found over the years is people don't always take full advantage of all the pieces of P6. So they, all our clients use it for scheduling. That's for sure. Then you have probably about 70% to 80%, I would say, do resourcing in it as well. Now, when it comes to costing, the number goes down significantly, maybe 40%-ish in that zone. And it's often our clients who have integrations that do the costing because they can push the data from other places into P6. Okay, so that one of the common struggles is taking full advantage of the tool because it's not easy to use all the pieces if you don't have time to do it consistently. So that can be a big struggle. And as a result, you end up with many systems. So you might have part of your data in another cost tool. You might have part of your data up in maybe your accounting system. So it becomes quite laborious to handle all of that because we have so many systems. That it becomes challenging to get it all into one place and to be able to really see what you're dealing with, okay? So some of the examples I'm going to run through, they are based on real examples that we've built with various clients, and we have more, but this is, I think, a good starting point that I'm going to run through. And there, many of our clients, as I mentioned, will be in an integrated type of system when they start to look at costing. Now that doesn't have to be full automation, doesn't have to be a full integration necessarily. It could be using Excel as a gateway or a midway point. Okay, so there's lots of different ways to do it when you want to get data from other systems. Now the other challenge is getting the updating in if you're looking at true costing. With updating of units, whether it's labor units, materials, equipment, or expenses. Okay, so I'm going to show you some updating examples as well today. Now, another thing that we have found is the extended team, including accounting, may want different types of data. Your client, of course, will want the data in the currency that the project is in. So I'm going to show you a bit of multi-currency things that we've put into P6. I would say the P6 out of the box multi-currency is fairly weak. You have only essentially one rate across the whole system for conversions, which of course will not work with the craziness going on in the world right now. Our currency rates are all over the map. I think our Canadian dollar is probably lost. I'm not sure. I stopped watching, but at least probably 10 cents in the last few months. Okay, so understanding some multi-currency components in P6 can have some value. Doing it all outside in a different system may not always work for the team. So I'll touch on some multi-currency items that we've added as well. So some of the key benefits, we'll touch on them more as we run through, but it's just to get that data where it's tangible, your team can see it, they're not having to go in so many different systems, and automating the calculations, which I'm going to show you, and even going so far to automate integrations can really bring huge benefits. So there's a lot less moving parts, and your team focuses on the scheduling and then the updating, the percent completes, gathering the true percent completes. Okay, so let me touch on how it works, and then I'm going to go in and I'm going to actually show you the software. Okay, there's a comment in the chat. I've never seen a project successfully manage costs in P6 and always rely on other systems. Okay, so let's touch on some of the different things that we've had success with. And I'm not trying to say that it's standalone. So these examples are going to be examples from integrations, getting the data in P6 so it's usable. And I'm going to touch on our P6 reporter to get the data out as well. Okay, so I would definitely not say that P6 in and of itself is enough to do all the costing. I would definitely agree with that statement. But to gather the data in some presentable formats, it has its place. But I would say it's not a standalone, it's going to do it all for you. Absolutely not. You know, some of our clients used to use contract management, and some of our examples were contract management plugged into P6 through their accounting. So to do it well, you will use other tools. But what I'm going to show you is gathering it into P6 so that you can present it and have some data there that you can present also to your client, especially if you're an engineering or contractor type of role. You don't necessarily want to be showing so many different tools. So this is an option. And I think you'll see that P6-Calculator might have some places for your team to make some of the things that you do easier. Okay, so that's really, I think, the way to come at this particular webinar. So the way P6-Calculator works is it's embedded inside P6. So it's not its own tool outside that you go into. All the data, all the values are sitting inside P6. The calculations are in P6. Or you're seeing the outputs in P6. So we define what we're going to calculate, and then the calculations are there. We've got roll-ups, roll-downs, and I'm going to show you some of that. And it's automating some different processes that you might deal with. So I'm going to show you things like overhead and profits with percentages. I'm going to show you things like exchange rates. I'm going to show you different ways to model the resources and the costing. So I'm going to show you a few different things that, again, could potentially bring some value to your team. Okay, so I will jump in and I will show you how this, just some different ideas of things that we've done in the past. Okay, so let me jump to my other screen and I'll share that screen and just sort of give you the lay of the land. Okay, so what you're looking at is a few different projects, and I'm going to use 3 different projects today. The first I'm going to start with is a project that's empty. Okay, so typically, you know, you're working on a bid perhaps, or you've won a bid, or you're looking at putting together some long-range estimating, just depending. Now, usually that estimating is not probably done in P6, unless you're very heavily labor related, like in our kind of work, being computer consultants, we could do our estimating in P6, but most of the types of clients we deal with have other systems that they build those things in. So those other systems will usually be able to be put out into Excel so that we can get that data up into P6. So what I'm showing you here is an Excel sheet. It's a sheet that works with our P6 loader. It's from our P6 loader. And our P6 loader is a tool, another add-on tool, but a very useful one because it allows you to push and pull data, pretty much all the data in P6, and it lets you push and pull global data as I'm showing you here. So this is going to be the resource dictionary, and I'm going to show you that in a second. And it lets you push and pull more than one project at a time. Okay, so those are some of the challenges that we have with out-of-the-box P6. Okay, so let me go back into P6, oops, and show you the resource dictionary. So one of the things that we have a challenge with in P6 is our resource dictionary. Although it's highly flexible, the place that we've got a gap is the units and prices. So we don't have the ability to put unlimited prices into the dictionary. So if you're a contractor, this can become problematic because you may have different rates on every single one of your projects. So it makes it hard to manage this. And if you want to have one consistent resource dictionary across all your projects, so you can actually compare projects to projects, this is a gap in the tool. So with one of our contractor clients, what we did was we said, okay, well, instead of using these 5 out-of-the-box rates, we're going to let you put in rates for every single project. That way we've got a consistent dictionary, and that dictionary will allow us to compare all the projects and see which ones are actually hitting the cost that we put in and which ones are blowing that cost out of the water. Okay, that's what or which ones are doing better. So that's an important piece of the puzzle. When you're a contractor, ultimately, if you can't understand your costs at the resource level, you have no idea whether you're bidding appropriately or not. Okay, I see some questions. I will try and tackle them after. Okay, so keep putting them in, though. That's what will be excellent. Okay, so not only in this example are we looking at different rates, but the other thing that comes into play, of course, is overheads and profits. Or you may have other things that you want to model, taxes, margins, okay? Doesn't matter what it is. This is just giving you an idea of the kind of things you can do here, okay? So what I'm saying here is for this project, 23011, we had certain rates and we had certain overheads and profits that we're going to calculate every time we use this, this resource. So that's data that you probably will get from your engineering group. So in this example, I've got another project, a brand new one, that we're either bidding on or we received the award, whatever the case is. Usually you're bidding on it because you're usually putting a schedule together as well. So I'm going to load up what my estimating team gave me as rates for these resources. So these are just a handful of resources that we're going to use on this project. This is the rate that they put in. In this case, it's taxes and margins, okay? And I'm going to call them overheads and profits, but the fields were actually tax and margin. So I'm going to load those up from scratch. Now, the other thing the estimating team would normally give you, or you may have a standard WBS. Usually, you want to get as many standards as you can, otherwise you can't compare projects to projects. And activities. Okay, so in this example, I'm just going to load 2, but of course, in real life, you'd have way more activities. Now, I'm going to load in the resources that they've established are going to actually work on those activities. Okay, so very simple. This is all they need to give me. They're going to give me the resource. So it's a standard that we've got across the company. They're going to give me some sort of activity ID. Okay, and with my clients, I always try and get them to have a standard. Okay, so engineering is always 10, construction is always 40, etc. Okay, so that we have a standard approach. The cost account that this relates to, Okay, so this is another underused part of P6 is the cost accounting. And in this case, we've got roles. Okay, so it's always a good idea to use the resources and the roles in P6 because it brings a lot of flexibility to different reporting, different histograms that you can put together, etc. So in this example, I've got some roles. Now, in terms of the data they need to give me, it's not much. So I need to know the resources and I need to know the quantities. They might give me what they calculated for the rate, but ultimately P6 will recalculate that using the resource rate that we've got in here, okay? And I'll show you how to override that if you need to. And then we may take advantage of the expense piece in P6, okay? So the expenses have a place for many things. We've got quite a few clients who use the expenses, and it's usually for things that you don't need to look at limits. That would be one reason to use an expense. And if you do need to look at limits on some of these things, then use resources, okay? So things like travel, things like administrative type costs have a very good home here in expenses. Okay, so what I was trying to model here with this Excel sheet is the kind of things you need to get from your estimating folks. And if you use something like this, you want standards in place. So it's very easy for them to get you that data out in Excel via macros or whatnot. And then we've got a standard way of loading it up into P6. Okay, I'll show you that in a bit. Let's go to P6 Loader. So I'm going to use our P6 Loader tool to show you how you can load that sort of data that you get from your estimating group. So I'm going to browse to that particular file, and I'm going to upload it, and hopefully this works. And then okay, so it worked. Everything went in without a problem. And what I need to do now is just go back up into P6, and I'm going to refresh my screen. Okay, so we use the P6 API to push that data in. So you see those numbers come into the screen. So my 333, my 0.3 margin, my 0.05 tax, and these can be whatever you want. Okay, so in some of the projects I called it overhead and profit. Okay, it doesn't matter. The idea is it's just some calculation. Now, that loaded up my resource dictionary. So now I want to see the effect on my activities. So I just have those two simple activities, and I've got resources on some of them and expenses as well. Okay, so very, very simple example. Now to see the actual effect of all that, because you can see all this is still sitting at zeros, we just have a little button that we use to tell the computer, okay, go ahead and recalculate all of this. And I'll save that, and then I'm going to run it. So this is P6-Calculator now going to go do a bunch of legwork in the back. So this could take a bit of time, especially on a larger project. Now, in this case, it's a very small project, so it should come through pretty quick. And I'll look at this screen. And what you're going to see is you're going to start to see some of these numbers start to calculate. And then I'll explain what it's up to, okay? So when we see the word pass here, we know it's finished. So it's still working away. And in our database, because we demo so many of our tools, of course, we have a lot of things running. So we'll give it a second here. Okay, still working away. So while it's doing that, I'll jump over to the project tab, and we'll take a look at what it's going to do. Okay, so let me try and explain the fields that you're seeing here. So the example I have is we're a Canadian company, And this particular project is being run in US dollars. So it's an American project that we won or we're bidding on. And I want to see the values both in the project currency. So the currency I'm going to be communicating with the client, and the currency that I'm going to be communicating with our internal team, how we're doing, okay, against other projects. So the ledger, this is the ledger currency, if you will, or the project currency. Okay, I don't know why it's taking so long. Okay, it's okay, we'll let it do its thing. Okay, so what we're looking at is we've got a project rate. There we go, it's done. So we've got a project rate, a currency exchange rate between Canadian and US dollars at 1.32. I've got a base overhead and profit number. Okay, so a base number, but that number I showed you a minute ago over in the resources, this is going to override that. Okay, so it's huge, highly flexible. So we have sort of an approximate overhead and profit, and then we have specific ones for each of these resources. So you can be very, very flexible on how you do the costing. And then I'm going to show you that we can also introduce overrides. So these are the values I'm going to communicate with the client. So the sell rate, this is my cost. Okay, and this is usually the number that's going to align with your accounting. And then, of course, we've got overhead and profits that are being calculated and then rolled up here. And then in the ledger, so the cross-project ledger, these are the values that are going to show up. Okay, so it gives me a good amount of flexibility here to be able to do a variety of different kinds of reporting. And I'll show you some examples out in Power BI after. Now, where is all that coming from? So that the infrastructure for costing in P6 is always expenses and resources. That's our playing field for doing any costing in P6. So let's start with resources. So what you see here is we have some labor, non-labor, and material resources. Those came from the Excel sheet. We had some quantities, and we have those sell rates. Now, you might find that for particular reasons, you may not want to stick with the out-of-the-box sell rate, the 333 that we loaded in. So I might need some overrides, okay? So we have an override field here, and we can recalculate these. Now, I'm going to recalculate those in a second. Now, we have the cost, the project cost, but the cost plus the overhead and the profit, these three are what is totaling up to the sell value. Okay, so we can track all of those very cleanly, both in the project currency as well as the ledger currency. So we're tracking both the US and the Canadian in here. Okay. Now my quantities came from estimating. So those are fixed unless estimating gives me new values, but those are fixed. But it's conceivable there may be points where we might want to change the rates for a variety of reasons. So on a change order, perhaps you might want to try for a bigger rate. You might feel like you need to put a lower rate for certain things, okay? So we need some of that flexibility in the modeling that we want to do. Now I changed some of these values, so I want to definitely recalculate this. But before I do that, let's jump into expenses. So same sort of thing. Expenses are a little less complicated, of course, than resources. So we have the same sort of fields. So we have our sell total, we have our cost, our overhead and profits as well. And that's both for the project currency and the ledger currency. Okay. So those values merge up to these roll-ups. So I think you can see that we have these little weird fields here We've got brackets with a little caret symbol, and that lets us know that it's a roll-up field. So we have roll-up capability in P6-Calculator, and I'll show you that in action. I'm going to add one on the screen in a bit as an example. Now, what it does is it merges the resources and the expenses, and it puts it together in the total up here on the activity. It does the same thing to the WBS, and it does the same thing up to the project level, okay? So out of the box, extra fields that you add to P6 do not understand what they are. So it does not do anything. There's no automation to those. So we have that in P6-Calculator, and we use it for all sorts of things that we add to the system, okay? So that's happening automatically. Now, I made an edit to that. So I definitely want to get it to go again. Oops, sorry. Come on. There we go. And I will ask it to go again. Okay. So you can do this as many times as you wish. When I demo it, I've got to do it a few times. I think I actually better reset that because I think I just hadn't refreshed it. Okay. I'm going to save it, and I'm going to refresh it, and I'm going to let it go off and do its thing. Okay, so let me go back to activities here. And I'll go back to resources. Okay, so I changed these two values. So what we're expecting to see is all this get recalculated. So we're taking advantage of some of the base functionality in P6, then we've added P6-Calculator on top of it to enhance what you can do in the system, okay? Now, some of you may choose to do some of this outside in other tools and just add additional pieces to the modeling in P6. So we've got clients that do things in many different ways. So think of these as ideas of additional things that Calculator can do. Okay, and we'll just update it again. I just want it to refresh these, and then you'll see the way that this can work. So it's important to always give your team doing this kind of work in P6 the ability to override, okay? So when you're in an integration and you receive an actual value, let's say of 10 units installed, well, you might know that that's only 10 units installed and invoiced. But we know that we have a lot more units installed, but not invoiced. So this is always the drawback that you get into and the struggle we get into using accounting systems for actuals. You need a place to manage the incurred or what's actually installed at the site. So overrides are really important anywhere that you're working in, whether it's in a cost control tool or in this case in P6. Okay. Okay, looks like it's coming. Okay, good. So you see that it recalculated these two, and I've got a new value. And then those roll up to the estimated cell, and then roll up to the WBS, and then roll up to the project. So this is how this tool can work very, very nicely for you to do a lot of heavy lifting, and you can plug it in to an integration and then allow additional components to take place inside the system. Now, the inputs were coming from this field. You saw that I did one overwrite, but I might need to change all of these civil engineering. Let me just make sure that's the right role. We could do the crew. I just did the overwrite on this. We could do it on anything. The foreman, I happen to pick both of them, which is fine. Let's go on the engineering lead. Okay, so we can also do an override and change the whole thing in here. So I was on a good one here. So we can change it here as well. And again, just recalculate it. And if I want to do a different margin on here for whatever reason, you know, I can go ahead and change these values. So I would save it again, and I can rerun it again. So I can rerun this as many times as I want. I can also automate it a bit more, but in this case, with it being a demo, it makes sense to let it be done manually. Okay, so this is how I can work on this particular kind of example. So I can make updates to the rates. I can use the out-of-the-box additional fields that I loaded, from the P6 loader, and use those rates and do overrides as well. Okay, so very flexible, gives a lot of capability, and enhances what's inside of P6. And in this example, it lets me do multi-currency in a much more detailed way. Now, we do have clients that have multi-currency needs that are not just one currency to another. So in this case, US to Canadian. You might actually have multiple currencies that you need to handle within a project. So we've got clients that have that example. So let me go ahead and look at that example. And I'll just flip to my other layout. So this example is one of our clients, one of our key ones that we worked on. This sort of modeling was a manufacturer. So they were buying multiple products all around the world. So we started with USD and euros. During the rollout, we added multiple others, and it took no time. It took very little. There's really no programming changes because we made a very flexible design to add these in a very flexible way. So you see there's a consistent naming convention, and P6-Calculator knows that if I added an FX field for a different currency, it would pick it up automatically, okay? So that the flexibility is there for the client to model what they need to. So let me open this project to run through the idea. So what we have here is we have the agreed upon exchange rate for the US. So you can see this one was different than the one I just used, and that's not something that you can do very readily in P6. So this gives us more flexibility to have different exchange rates per project. And in this example, multiple currencies that we're going to handle on a given project. Okay, so I'll jump into the activities, and I will switch to a different layout just to make it easier to see these fields, and run through some examples. So what I did here to try and make it a bit easier to see, why does it do that? There we go. Is I made the activity from the estimate, and then I'm going to show you the activity that we're going to use for updating, okay? Just to, when I get into the updating examples. Let's start with the estimate. So I've got an example with labor, and then I have another example where I'm going to show you the expenses, okay? Now, before I jump into that, let's start with this simpler one. So what we find with estimating, just like I showed you in the last example, is we usually estimate maybe to a role, especially for labor. Let's talk about labor first. So in this example, it's an engineering, manufacturing, specialty example. So they don't necessarily know who's going to exactly work on the project, but they have an estimate with to the role. Okay, that's typically where it's going to start. So again, that estimate would be loaded up from another system through Excel or through an integration. You can put them in by hand, but of course, using one of those technologies would be a faster way. Then they're going to start getting some updates. Okay, so you're going to see these. Now we start to get timesheets possibly coming in with different people with different rates, or they don't even have a rate in the system because they're not even in P6. They just came in this example from an integration. Okay, so I'm going to touch on how we are going to help handle the updating on that. Now before we get into the deep dive on updating, let's look at the procurement and the estimate. Okay, and I'm going to start with a simpler example. Okay, so this is the estimate, and I'm going to actually just remove these and I'm going to bring them back using calculator. Okay, just to make it easier to see the types of things that you can do with some automations. So in this example, they're going out and they're buying something, some sort of piece of equipment. We know it's an equipment. It shows here the cost account. And it's a small piece of equipment, meaning it's under $50,000 is what they've got in this example. So but you see this estimate is over 200,000. So it's likely multiple vendors that they're going out and buying small equipment, and the overall total in the estimate is coming in at $216,000. Euros, I should say, not dollars. Okay. Now, how the heck do we show that if our project is being reported in Canadian? This number is not going to be correct. So what we need to do is we need to have a way to translate that into Canadian dollars so that our corporate reporting is clean, okay? And our reporting to the client is clean because in this example, it's a Canadian client as well. So we need a way to do something like that. So let me go ahead and run the calculator on it and get it to go, and we'll let it do its thing. Now I'll explain a little bit more about some of the requirements that you can get into and you can model. Now, this particular example, they also want it to have calculations on a variety of things that automatically took place. So things like shipping. Let's actually go look at them because I can't remember all of them. Let's look here. Okay, so brokerage, freight, exchange, handling. So they wanted these to automatically be calculated because every time they had certain items that they were purchasing, these always went along with it. And that's quite a few things to have to calculate. So this line is going to get blown out into numerous lines once this estimate runs through and it does its thing. Okay, and I just want to double check to make sure I use the right field. Yeah, I did. Perfect. I'll just go back. It'll just take a minute here. Okay, so the modeling of this was pretty simple. I'll show you some of the modeling. So we gave them the ability to put in the percentages that each one of those needed to be so that it would automatically create the lines. We have another client where we had a slightly different type of thing for resources. So they had a crew in their estimate, but that crew didn't match resources. So they needed the crew to be split into multiple resources. So that's another type of thing that we've modeled so that we could do the histograms, because the crew is not the trade that performs the work. And we needed to understand the tradespeople, the individual tradespeople on the job site so that we could get the right number of people to the project. Particularly if you've got a remote job site and you've got camps, those are really important because you can only have a certain number of people at the job site because you only have a certain number of beds. So that's always a tricky one. Okay, so here's an example. So we took the one estimate line and we blew it out into these additional lines. So we're calculating the brokerage, the freight, the handling, plus we calculated the exchange rate. Okay, so it's coming from the conversion that we had at the project level, and it knows it needs to convert this with using the euro, and that euro is adding $97,000 to the overall total. Now these values are being pushed up into these values up top so that you can see them. You can see the amounts of the different components that you need to report on. Okay, so in this case, the exchange rate is here. It's in its own field, so we can see the total amount of exchange rate required for this. Now that's broken out into the actual currency. So when you have a team that has to go and hedge the currency and go pre-buy euros, this is important for them to have this information at their fingertips, okay? And being pretty accurate because we've got a date on this, okay? So this is where this can become really important because we know with expenses, you're either going to pay at the beginning, pay a bit during the time, or pay at the end. And we can control that on each of the lines, okay? So things like freight, brokerage, those types of things, they're usually, well, again, it depends on how you set your activity up, but it would be when you're about to receive. So it would be at the front, typically. And for things like exchange rate, you may have to prepay at least a portion. Okay, so your team needs to know in advance not only the amount, but the timing. So that's where this can become really, really valuable for your team on the way that they're putting the project together and getting their currencies in place and dealing with the hedging that they've got to do. Now, let's go back to touch on some updating. Okay, so typically what we have when we're estimating, right, we've got a very basic set of data that we estimated to, both on the expenses as well as on the resources. So let's go to this one. Okay, so this was my estimate on my resources, but once I actually start executing and updating, we could have all sorts of different things happening, right? We may have, obviously in this example, multiple people performing the work for the different roles. Okay, so if I sort this by role, we actually have 3 folks performing this role. And in this case, 1 person doing this role and 1 and 1. Okay, but it could be any sort of combination of things. The same holds true when you're working at the job site or when you're procuring items, right? You may have thought you were going to purchase just in euros, but then you end up buying things that are maybe cheaper in Canada, maybe cheaper in the US, etc. Okay, so once you start updating, all bets are off, right? You can get a lot of different elements coming through that you didn't expect. So what I want to show you is the types of things that we've done with some of our clients, and again, things that could be useful with your team. So in this example, we had 3 estimates that we received, and these were the hours and these were the costs that we had anticipated. Okay, now we start to maybe in this example get timesheets in. So we're getting in some timesheets here. And these timesheets are coming in for this Tara, Tracy, and Daryl. So these folks are starting to work on the project and they're actually giving us their timesheets. Well, how do we get these timesheets to marry up to the role that they're working on? Okay, because the role was what was holding the budget. So this is something that P6-Calculator in this scenario is going to do for us automatically. Okay, so we didn't get any timesheets against this one role because there is no person that is this role. These are the folks performing that role. So we don't have any actuals against them, but we need the forecasting, the estimate to complete, to understand that these, how many hours is that? 90 hours are related to this 150, okay? So we're using P6-Calculator to do that heavy lifting for us so that the project manager can see very easily against the original estimate, the estimate to complete units and the estimate at complete units, and then they can put in their particular forecast on it, okay? So we need the PM or the appropriate person to be able to do the forecasting. Now you could use our P6 add-on, another one of our add-ons, our CAPS tool, to deploy these fields so they can forecast in them. You could use P6 Loader. This client did use P6 Loader to give them a field to do the forecasting in. There's many ways you can deploy this field for the PM to do the forecasting, okay? So in this example, the PM put in our estimate at completion, which is the at completion field in P6. We've just renamed it here. Sorry, we gave them their own field and we're going to calculate the at completion in the P6 fields. That's why I labeled them this way, okay? So in this case, we're going to go over. You can see here that we had only planned for 150 hours in this case, but they're putting in 170, 219, 229, okay? Now, I can change those. So that was my last forecast. Maybe I'm going to reforecast. So I'm coming up to the end of April and I want to do my reforecasting on this. So my at completion, perhaps I'm expecting it to go better. And perhaps this one is really not going well and it's going off the rails. And so I can do some data entry inside of here to put the values in, okay? Now this is going to take in consideration the values I've already got and rerun the numbers. So like we've done before, I would go up to my controller because I want it to run when I'm ready. And in this case, I want it to reforecast. And I can ask it to go ahead and do that heavy lifting for me. And off it will go. Okay, so just like we've been seeing before, we let it do its thing and it'll go through and do the calculations. Now, the other thing that we always deploy with this sort of component is we deploy indicators that will help us know what's going on. We also deploy tags that let us know the last time we ran this, right? Because then you get into, did I update it? Did I not update it? This sort of thing. When we're doing integrations, we always put flags for the integrations. So in this case, this is flagging that we got new resources that hadn't been part of the plan have been loaded in here. Okay, so that way we can easily find them, we can see them, we can report on them, we can make sure that we can filter on them, right, in different layouts. So it's really important when you're doing this kind of stuff that you don't make the job harder, that you make sure that there's a lot of nice flagging so people can touch and feel and see the things that you've introduced for them to deal with. Okay. Okay, so it's still running. So we'll see this flip to pass when it's done its thing. And we'll just wait and let it keep working on that. The Same would hold true on the expenses in this case. So we'd want to allow the PM to forecast on the expenses. Need to go to the other one. Let me do that. So forecasting on the expenses would be on the values of the estimate. So this particular one is a little more complicated. So we've got not only things that we're buying that are in Canadian, we're also buying things in US dollars. Okay, so you can have it many different ways. This one's a little more complicated, and I'm forecasting on this particular miscellaneous item. So the budget is 1025, and I'm forecasting here my estimate at completion is going to be 2500. Okay, so 2500. Now we would want to always allow the PM to either forecast on estimate to complete, which is the remaining, or the estimate at completion, so the total. So you want to always make it flexible for them so they can do it either way. Now in this example, I just used the estimate at completion, but I might want to use the estimate to complete in some scenarios. Okay, so this is a field, it's got that roll up automatically on there. So this is a field that I might actually want to see on the activity because I have more than one that I might be forecasting on. Okay, so this is a field that is available for what we call the roll up, the auto roll up that we've got in Calculator. So I'm going to show that. I'm going to add that on the fly, and then I'm going to flip into questions because it's a lot of different things that I'm trying to show you as available here. So let's go back to the resources, and let's go back to that one that I did the updating on. Okay, so this, let's scroll over a little bit. So this was the one that these two that I just reforecasted. So the estimate at completion, it had been 170. Okay, so it was higher than this. So this is now bumped it down because I said the at completion is the 120. Then it's calculated it and it's put it here, and it's taking into consideration the, let me sort it by role so it makes more sense. So it's taking into consideration the role. The same holds true for this second one that I updated. So I bumped this up. I think it was like 219 or something of that nature. I bumped it up here to 250. So it's taking that and it's seeing that we're going to go over in this case. And then what you would want to do is make sure that all your flagging is going along with it. Okay, let's do this last item, and then we'll jump into the questions. Sorry, it's just something funky going on my screen. It clears out the title, so it's back now. So the same would hold true here for the estimate at completion and to completes inside of here. Now, why don't we just use the out-of-the-box fields? Well, because we want to have an audit trail. We want to have an audit trail of what the PM puts in. And in this case, we're consolidating different lines into one. So that's why we're using user fields to add functionality into P6. Okay, so let me show you one last thing, and we'll jump into questions. So I want my PM estimate to complete also to be up here on the activities. So it's not a field that's available on the activity, but I realize I do want it. So I want to have the flexibility to be able to add it into the system. So many of you may well know that you have the ability to add fields to P6, and you can see we've got a ton of fields that we've added to P6, and one of them is this PM. I'll just go and find it. PM estimate to complete cost. It's got this funky little arrow pointing up between two brackets. This is also often the way we show a roll-up field, an automatic roll-up field. So I want to add this field, but I want it up on my activity, and I may want it up on my WBS, and I may want it up on my project, okay? So I can add fields to P6, and these are the options we have. Costs indicators are the ones that we're using heavily for this example. So just by adding it to the activities, I can then add it to my screen. And it's going to be right in here under, I might need to refresh it just a sec. Let me add it to my screen. And get it up there so we can see it in action. Okay, so it's right there, and I'll just add it to my screen real quick here. And I'll put it beside the estimate at completion. Okay, so it's a new field. I've just added it on the fly. So you can see it doesn't have anything in it. It doesn't understand anything about it. So once again, I'm just going to ask it to go ahead and refresh. So this is an automatic. I don't have to tell it to run. It's running automatically. So it'll take a second to find all the matching fields down here and start to populate them up in here. Now, just to make sure we have some values in here, I'm just going to throw in a number here so we can see something in action. Okay, so while it's doing it, I'll start looking at whether there's some questions I missed. Okay. Let me just make sure. I think there's a few, so let me make sure I didn't miss any. Okay, so I think I answered the first question. No, I think I didn't answer all this. Okay, so let me just run through it. Okay. Okay, is the integration you're referring to with pushing and pulling data only available in Oracle Premier Cloud? No, no. So what we do is we use the web services or API tool that you can get. It's an add-on to P6, and you can build integrations using that. Now, Oracle also has a tool called Gateway. So that's their tool that also is a framework to do integrations. So that's another, those are sort of the two main options. You could always back end, which is a terrible, terrible idea. So that's a third option, but usually you use the API or the gateway would be the two tools. And you do not need to only be in the Oracle Cloud to do that. Okay, so you can do that on premise. You can do it in your own private cloud. Lots of different ways to deal with integrations. Now, Emerald, we're just about to go into our 29th year, and we've had programmers on our team from the very beginning. And so we have done a heck of a lot of integration, and to just about every system you could imagine, okay, from SAP, Oracle Financials, Oracle Fusion, JD Edwards, Maximo. We've built some for ourselves, so we use Zoho as our key tool. So many, many, many tools. Discover is another one, several timesheets tools, some drawing tools. So we've done a lot. Ariva, Aviva, so many tools. Okay, so if you want more data in P6, but you don't know how you're going to manage it, reach out, because maybe simple integration makes sense. Okay, next question. Can you please clarify if the cost fields you are using are custom fields or standard out-of-the-box fields? Okay, so our framework is we always use custom fields for integration. We use custom fields for data entry points. We use custom fields for overrides. And then we push into the P6 fields. That's how we do things. That's from many years of experience on a nice, tidy way to do things. So these are custom fields that I'm showing you that we've added, and we're using the P6 fields to put data into. Okay, you referred to calculator and uploader. Are these the same tool or separate tools? They are separate tools. So this tool is P6-Calculator, and I showed you P6 Loader, two different tools that I showed you. What is the system doing when you rerun it? Is it applying the changes you have made to the variables in the custom fields? Yeah, so it's doing lots of different things. So there's programming, obviously, that we've added to the tool to do a variety of things. So it's using the values I've added, and then it's making calculations. So the overhead and profit, it's calculating those off of the base fee, and then it's doing totals. So it's doing a variety of different things. So this is a tool that you would not buy and just plug in. There is consulting that comes along with it. Can different projects in the same database have different exchange rates? Yes, yes, absolutely. So let me try and show you that a bit better. So yeah, so in this example, they're the same. That doesn't have to be the case. So I can definitely have different values, which is hugely important. And that's a weakness, unfortunately, with P6, is we don't have that flexibility. So you can have, in this case, different exchange rates for each currency in this example. And if I flip back to my single currency example, yes, you can definitely have different exchange rates as well. Okay, so here's one where it's 1.32. This is 1.33. So yes, you can definitely handle different percentages, in this case, exchange rates, to different projects. Absolutely. Okay, the activities defined in your schedule do not look like what I would usually define as activities. Yes, of course, they are not real examples the way I named them. Absolutely. I named them that way so I could try and explain it clearly in the demo. You're absolutely right. Things like procurement of pumps, that would be more typical. So yeah, these are made up just for the demo, just to make sure I explain them correctly. What activity type are you using for these costing activities? So that's a good question. So you can use a variety of different activity types. So when we start to go down this path with our clients, often we're going to use physical percent complete because we can. Duration is the most common, but as soon as you start to get into costing, you want to start looking at physical, because we can have physical, we can have our units, and we have our costs separated, okay? Especially if you got integrations. So in this example, I've got it physical percent completes, and if you're a contractor, often it's fixed duration units. So that's, and if you're an owner, often fixed duration units as well, okay? But you have flexibility. You don't have to stick with just one. You can be very flexible. Is this schedule still a valid critical path network? I would be interested to see the results of an Acumen Fuse schedule health check run on this schedule. I don't think you would want to use this schedule because it's not a real schedule right now. This is just a demo example for the costing. But certainly if I had proper logic, which I don't in this case, it should be able to pass the checks from a schedule health check. So we also have P6QA. You could run our P6QA on it. So depending on what you're looking at. Lots of red and yellow flags there. It appears like there's a lot of work for the end user to get a report out. Yeah, well, again, this is a demo. We're just trying to highlight the features. It's not a real example at this point by any stretch of the imagination. Yeah. But the key thing is you want those flags to be available. And the reason you want them available is you need the team to see them. Okay. So from the data inputs, right, you can get all sorts of different kinds of outputs. So in this example, I'm showing the two snapshots from the last month and this month, and I'm looking at where we're at in terms of, it's a construction category, a cost account category. So we've got earthworks labor, earthworks materials. So it's merging in this case using the cost accounts. And we're using expenses and resource assignments. And we're trying to show where we've got variances. Okay, so here's sort of example that you can get out of the system. And we've got lots of different examples that we use our P6 reporter. So it's another tool to snapshot P6 data and push it out in an easier way to get it out to your corporate reporting. So in this example, we've pushed it out to Power BI, but you could push it out to your SAP Analytics or to Tableau, BI Publisher, whatever reporting engine you use corporately. So this is using P6-Calculator data, and we can do all sorts of different cost type data, okay, using cost information coming from the system. So we can filter on different cost categories, we can filter on the cost accounts, and you know, if we just wanted to focus in on certain cost accounts and when we're spending the money, you can do that quite readily with that coming out of P6. And we can do this sort of graph, this sort of chart. Oops, how do I maximize it? There we go. That's not quite what I wanted to do. Whoops, that's not what I wanted to do either. Sorry, I'm clicking on the wrong buttons. But this gives you an idea of the order of magnitude of the costs that you've got inside the system. Okay, so lots of nice graphics, and more of our clients are pushing data out to their corporate tool, and the tool that we use to push that out is our P6 reporter tool. So we've got webinars on that one. It might be another one worth exploring. Okay. Good. So I've run over on time. Let me just see if I missed any questions. Okay, I don't see any currently. So let me just go back here. And I just want to show one more. Yeah, and then, you know, if you do want to do some critiquing on costing and whatnot, one of the outputs that would be pretty handy is something like this. So these are some of our outputs from our P6 QA. This is more food for thought again, to think about the sort of outputs that you can get when you snapshot the data. And we can look at different time frames, but we can also look at the same project and how it's moving over time. Okay, so we've got this sort of output from our P6 QA tool. And we've got different preset dashboards. Now these are looking at durations and whatnot, but we could look at resources, we could look at expenses and add those to these very readily. Okay, so lots of different ways that you can look at the data and get the outputs that you're interested in. Okay, so that's really ultimately what we're striving for. So we put all this stuff in P6 because we need people to see it and understand the timing that we're asking for. Okay, so that's, the outputs are hugely important. Okay, great. So I've run over time and I appreciate you guys staying on. Let's go ahead and wrap it up. So I gave you a deep dive. It was very quick. I know it was quite a bit of information, and you need to look at these sorts of things as food for thought. So if there's something that's you're finding as a gap in P6 that you're looking to fill, but it just seems like it would be too much data entry, or you're struggling with some data over here, some data over here, and you want to find a way to bring it together, just reach out. Because what we found is with these, a huge number of clients, we've been able to streamline these things, which makes the day-to-day effort go down with automatic statusing and things like that. And the efficiency of the team using P6 goes up, but the big win is on the visibility that you get out by pushing this over into these sort of dashboards. And I just showed you something very, very quickly. So if those are of interest, join our P6 Reporter webinar, because we'll do a deeper dive on some of these. Now, the other thing is when you're able to load the data, you're getting more accuracy because you're not having people type all this stuff over and over again. So that's a big, big win. And some of our clients, I've got safety there. It seems like it's not relevant. It's not necessarily relevant to the costing pieces I've shown you here, but we've got a lot of the other P6-Calculator utilities. We've got auto loop checking, and we've got auto loop flagging. We've got, gosh, there was so many of them. Calendar checking, and calendar creation, auto creation by intersecting calendars. So any of you that used SureTrack years ago, we used to have this meeting type calendar, which we've never got back. So we made a calendar intersector to create a meeting calendar. Okay, so we've used P6-Calculator for all sorts of different flagging. So again, reach out, because you never know. We may be able to help you solve some things that were difficult for your team. We've got auto archiving for clients that do turnarounds and maintenance, because you get work orders coming into the system and they never get out. So we've got auto purging, auto archiving, all sorts of different utilities. So definitely reach out if you're struggling with some of those things. So as I mentioned from the very beginning of our almost 28 years, almost in our 29th year here, we've had programmers on our team. So that's why we have so many tools for all of the Primavera tools. So we've got Unifier tools, P6 tools, contract management tools. We've got lots of different utilities. So we definitely have a broad range of skills and lots of utilities that we've built, and we're happy to explore whether we can help you use the tools more efficiently. Ultimately, that's the objective of all these tools. And for the most part, we built them for ourselves, and then our clients said we need those, so we started to make those products. That's really how this came to be. So you've got my number there, and email, and you've got Donna's as well. So if you're in Asia Pacific, Donna's in Philippines, so you can reach out that way as well. Yes, perfect. And we are recording the webinar, so we will definitely share that with you as well. So I'll stop recording here.